So I made this pen recently, and this is a custom fountain pen, but I want to actually have a rollerball section option for this. So today we're going to make a new section that is for the rollerball pen refill. Now there's a couple of key things to remember when you're doing this. One is we're going to be replacing that fountain pen nib and converter or cartridge area with a rollerball refill. So to make the rollerball section, we need to make it fit the rollerball ink refill as well as the spring at the back. Remember, rollerball springs go at the back of the refill. So we have a couple of things to take into consideration. One is the depth of our hole in our barrel here, the length of the section from the back shoulder to the tip of the nib, and we need to basically mimic those two measurements into the new rollerball section. So let's start by getting a few measurements. So I've drawn out here in extreme detail a replica of a rollerball refill. As you can tell, they're identical. Now I'm going to draw the barrel of the pen, and this is an artist rendering, so it may not be 100% accurate. These are the threads. And then what we want to know is our hole inside, how deep this is. And it looks like my refill is running out, so this is perfect time to make a new rollerball. So I'm going to get the depth of my hole, which if you watched the previous videos, you probably already know it. It's 70 millimeters. So I'm just going to write 70 there. I'm going to go ahead and get the depth of my cap, which is 55.8. Oh, I didn't draw my cap. So let's draw a cap. Now these I'm going to put dashes because they're inside. Those are the threads. And I've got my hole. And that was 55.85. And the 0.85 isn't that big a concern. I'm just getting some basics here. Okay, next let's measure up the refill. So I'm going to measure the whole thing first. 110. So that's tip to end, 110. I'm going to switch to a pencil. That might not cut out as much. All right, let's measure the front section from this first shoulder to the tip. It's about 15.5. So that's from here, and these are all in millimeters, to here. This next little guy is right about 5 from here to here. 5 mil. And then our main body here is 90. Now it should, obviously, if I take those, equal up or pretty darn close. Now, we need to know what we're drilling, so we're going to measure the approximate size. 2.43 millimeters. I'm going to round that to 2.5 because I do want a little bit of room in there for the refill to slide in. 4.4, we'll call that 4.5. Whoop, 5. And the main one here, it's not quite round. We'll call it 6.15. Okay, so what we have to do is determine when the refill is loaded up here and in the tube, or in the barrel, we have 70 millimeters of depth. I'm going to go and put this in here. And then we want to mimic this like that. So obviously we want this a little bit loaded. So we're pretty close on what we need once this is loaded up, and we can kind of mimic this section exactly from the looks of it here. So once we have that in there, we can do that. So let's kind of draw out our picture of what we're going to make. So let's start with a block, just our blank. And this is not to scale. So the first thing we're going to do is cut a tenon, and we're going to thread, and that's essentially these threads here. Then we're going to drill through to a certain depth, the same size hole that we would drill through our section. So in our first drilling sequence, that would be a 9/32. Then we want to drill, that's for the main barrel here. Then we want to drill this 4.5. We'll call it 4.5. And that is, 5 depth, 4.5 wide. We are going to use a drill bit that I have that is, let's see, 4.6 for 4.5. So we got our first one, our second one, and then our tip, which we would need to go to the end here. Now obviously I drew that too long. Whew, that is nice and straight. And that will be this 15 millimeters, and that's 2.5, and this drill bit I have is 2.7, that's going to work. And that will be to fit our RollerBall refill into the section. So we want that to fit in there snugly and be loaded with a little bit of that spring pressure, not too much but not too little, and then we can shape it. So essentially we're making a section in reverse, doing all the drilling first, making sure the refill fits, and then we'll shape it. Now, what do we need to use to make this? And we're going to use many of the tools we use to make the whole pen. Collet Chuck with collets. I'm going to use the Record Power Falcon Live Center because I want to use this long tip. It comes with 4 different tips, including a 60 and a pen mandrel saver, but I'm going to use this long one. We will use the 3 drill bits I just mentioned, as well as the niche system with the section M10 threads. Now, if you're wondering, are you going to use the tenon cutter to cut this? I actually will not be, and the reason being is just from those measurements you just saw, we're going to be drilling down to this 2.5 or 2.7 millimeter drill bit, and to use the tenon cutter I have to drill a pilot through, so I can't drill a 6 millimeter pilot hole through when I need it to be this small. So we're going to actually make the tenon by hand, which isn't a big deal, but we'll do that as well. So I think we're ready to get started. Let's get the blank chucked up and get this thing going. Okay, so what I've determined based on all of the sizing here is that I need my section to be 55 millimeters long, which includes my thread. So I'm going to make my roller ball 55 millimeters. I'm going to do 8 mil of a tenon, 8 mil, which leaves me 55, 47 up here. Now keep in mind, I'm going to measure from the back, so I still will include that 8 millimeter total. So I know I want 15 millimeters at the front, but I want the ink to only stick out 12 millimeters. So coming from the back, I'm going to drill the first drill first, second, third. I'll just draw a straight line through. It's easier. The first one will be not the 15 total because that goes to the tip, but the first will be approximately 12. So I want that to be 12 long. And then the second one was 5. So my first drill bit, this one, needs to be 55 minus 17. So if I measure 38, let's see, what is it, Amy? Can that be right? Yeah, 38. Okay. So my first drill will be 38. My next one will be 38 plus that 5, so 43. 3. And then my last drill will be through. So that's the 2.7, that's the 5, and this is the 9/32. So to review, what I'm doing, I'm going to take my blank. It's going to be 55 millimeters long to start with. And actually, I don't need to worry about the length now. I can always trim off the front where my through hole is to get it to the right length. But I'm going to do 8 millimeters of tenon for the threads, which will mimic these. The rest of it, I'm going to drill 3 holes through, a 9/32, 38 millimeters deep, a 5 mil, 43 millimeters deep, and then a 2.7 all the way through the blank. So you want to make sure that if you have a small drill bit, it is long enough to make it all the way through. Now I'm going to drill these in steps. I'm going to center drill and then do 1, 2, 3 and just knock them out. And then once that is done, I can test fit and make sure that my ink refill sits in there and seats. I don't want it snug. I don't want it tight because then it won't move freely with the spring tension. But that's what I'm going to do to get this started. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is load up my material, and I'm going to center drill the back end. Now remember, we're going to be doing a 2.5 millimeter hole, so I don't want to center drill very deep or with a big drill bit. So I'm using I think this is a number 2 or 3, which is too big, but I'm just going to use the point. And I'm just going to get it started, just like that. So that way when I do my other drilling, I have a center spot, but I'm not worried about having drilled it out too large. Rollerball sections are a little funky because you have to kind of shape the end at the end, which is not a great explanation, but you'll see here in a sec. Okay, so this is our back end. This is where we're going to be putting our tenon. So I am going to be drilling a larger hole, so I'm going to go ahead and drill that first. Get that out of the way. Now I'm going to grab the 9/32, and if you remember, I'm going to be doing a 38 millimeter hole. Now I'm using these stubbies, which isn't necessary, but if you have them, they work nicely as long as you don't need a deep hole. So this is the 9/32, and what I'm going to do is just mark a ballpark of my hole here. Actually, it's right to the end of my flute there, so I don't have to mark it. I'm just going to watch real carefully. The end of the flute right there is just about what I need. So I'm snugging up my tailstock on the base here. It's tight on the lathe bed, and I'm just barely touching it here because I don't want any side-to-side play. So I'm not locking it, but I'm tightening that to keep it from moving as much as I can. All right, let's drill this out. And you can use some drilling fluid if you want. However, you don't need to with these smaller bits, but it never hurts. You'll just need to clean it later. And I usually do clear this a couple of times because resin has a real bad habit of heating up inside your drill hole and causing you problems. Now, I'm going to give you a quick tip here. If you're ever going to move your bit inside your blank to start up in the blank further, stop your lathe. And here's the reason. If your lathe is running and you slide your drill bit into there and it hits the drill bit at the end of the material, it's going to catch and start going. And what it'll do is it'll pull your drill into the lathe, and you won't be ready for it because you're going to be moving it. So stop your lathe, touch the end, back it up a tiny bit, then turn on your lathe and proceed. Oh, I didn't lock my tailstock. You generally learn that the hard way, but maybe that'll save you from learning that the hard way. And the only reason you really want to load this up into the hole is so you don't have to just sit there and crank your tailstock for 5 minutes. All right, there's our hole. We are good. So that's our 9/32. I'm going to grab the 5 millimeter, and this one we are going 43 millimeters deep. It's weird, that drill bit looks bent, but I don't think it is. It's actually a very good quality bit, so I'm not super worried. It's just like my perception, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to mark this at 43. One thing you will want for this kind of work is a set of calipers. I prefer digital, but there's many kinds out there. All right, I'm going to get this up into the hole. So you can see I hit the hole. I'm going to lock it down, back it up just a hair. And hopefully I have that little bit of a cone from the other bit. And you can see I'm only going, there's my mark right there. I'm only going 5 millimeters in. So I'm not drilling very much with this one. Most of that probably that was already in there, but who knows. All right, now I'm going to switch. And this is my last bit, and I want to go all the way through. So I'm going to leave this out a little bit extended. All right. And I don't need to measure because I'm going all the way. And it seemed to center up nicely. Hopefully that made it all the way through. I guess I could extend this a little bit more to see. But I don't have much drill bit left. Yeah, we're through. Okay. So there's our 3 holes for our RollerBall refill. Let's take it out and see if it fits. Okay. I'm going to pull this out. I wish I had air with me, but I don't. Now, my tip might not stick all the way out because I have this a couple millimeters long, but I should at least see it. Okay, so hopefully you can see the RollerBall tip right there, which means my holes fit. It feels pretty good. It's not real wobbly. So I think I'm good to go. I can now cut my tenon and thread my tenon for the section. So I'm going to leave that out just a little more this time. And I don't need a whole lot. Remember, I said I wanted to do an 8 millimeter section thread on this. So I'm going to grab my caliper one more time. And you can see you use these quite a bit. And what I'm going to do is just set it to around 8. And I say around because I'm not super precise. Although it was pointed out to me that I use nice measuring tools to not be precise. So it happens. And what I'm going to do is put this up here so I can rest my marker. And I'm just going to draw my circle. I could have done with just the dot, but it's easier to see the whole thing. And I want to cut up to the line, not through the line. So if you look, 0.799 is right up to the edge of the line, and that is good enough for me. So I have to cut a tenon on this without using the tenon cutter. Now, like I said before, I can't use the tenon cutter because the pilot shaft is too long. I could always try to modify it, but we didn't have time for that today. Let's just cut this. I want to cut my tenon for the M10 threads. Now, you're probably saying, well, can you use the bushing off the tenon cutter to measure what you need to cut? Yes, but you should also know, just by the keywords M10, what size I need to make. Okay, bring it in. This is going to be exciting. 9.96 or 9.98, wherever you want to go. So M10 is a 10 thread. You can be slightly under. I don't think you can be slightly over, maybe. You don't want to be able to be too tight. So we need to cut an M10 or a 10 millimeter tenon on this so that we can thread it. So I'm just going to use my calipers. I'm going to go ahead and lock them here. And I'm just going to turn this down. Now, you can use any tool you want. I'm going to use a Carbide tool. Let's see. Actually, no. I'm going to use a parting tool. And that way I can make a nice straight tenon. I could use Carbide, but I've got this one here in sharp. So let's cut this down. And I'll first cut off the end. And what I can do is, it's a little out of round, I can get it down to size and measure it and then catch up the rest of the tenon to it. So just to give myself an idea of where I'm at, let's take a quick first measurement. And I am way too big. So you can see, I'll hold it on the side there, I'm at least a couple millimeters too big. But remember, a millimeter off one side is actually 2 because it's going around. And take measurements often. You don't want to be too far and then realize it because it's harder to put it back on. So take off a little, try it, I'm getting closer. If you had the Carbide parting tool, that would be a great one for this. But this is just a record power 3/16 parting tool, it works great. Now, I'm right on maybe, I'm a little tiny bit too much, so that's okay. That's why I cut the end. So you can see here, I'm just like a fraction of a millimeter too small. But I would be tapering the end anyway, because I like that little lead in. So now I can use that as my guide. And I'm gonna go ahead and cut in the rest here. Not quite up to the line. There we go. And you can cut tenons with anything. If you have a boring head, boring heads work great. Obviously the tenon cutter is the preferred choice when you can use it. But in a case like this, just make do with what you got. Now I know I'm way big, but I just want to make sure, just in case. Yeah. It looks like I rocked it a little bit there. I want to try to get that level across. Just a tiny bit more. And I'm going to make some real tiny cuts because I don't want to go any smaller than I have to. I'm real close here. Ah, perfect. I don't know if you could see that. It just barely slid over and it's right there. So that was a good demonstration because you get to see how much more efficient the tenon cutter is than cutting a tenon by hand. Now, am I up close enough? Yeah, I think so. Kind of wore off my line a little bit there, but that's the thick line. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do, you may remember this from the videos before, is I'm just going to give this a little sanding. Not real in depth, but I want to polish this before because it's hard to polish after. And I just want to take off any tool marks, anything that might give my threads any kind of hassle. I'm going to kind of taper the end for the lead in of the threads. And I want to make sure my back end here is kind of flat. So I'm kind of holding the paper rigid towards the shoulder because I don't want a tapered tenon. I want it good and flat. All right, I think that looks pretty good. And it sure shines it up nice. Okay. Now we can tap our, well, not tap, we can now thread our tenon with our M10. Okay, I'm going to prep my niche system for the die that I'm going to thread my tenon with. Whew, that was a mouthful. I'm using the M10 threads, which looks like probably the last thing I did. But I am going to flip this die over so that my lead-in threads are out. And I'm going to clean it because whoever used it last left it full of goobers. Me, I'm the one who used it last. All right, get that lined up. Get in there, buddy. Loosen this, tighten this. And you want to tighten these little set screws because you don't want your die spinning on you. Okay, that's the niche system ready to go. I don't need any fluid, but I'm going to go ahead and use a little anyway. This is just WD-40. I'm going to bring it up, lock my tailstock, push the niche system up to the tenon, and push forward while I rotate. And you can see the little curly cues coming off that tenon. I'm going to go forward and then I'm going to back up. And while I'm backed up, I'm going to try to knock these threads out of here because, I mean, I only have 8 millimeters total, but I want to get this right up to the shoulder. And those little threads could actually keep it from getting all the way up there. So I'm going to back it up again. I'm going to try to knock those out. They should be loose once you back it up, hopefully. And then when I get to that shoulder, I just want to stop. I don't want to keep pressing because that tenon is pretty thin on my piece here. And it's an easy thing to snap if you're not careful. All right, so let's flip our die. And by flipping it, it allows us to get a little closer to this shoulder where you can see there's a little bit of a flat spot. Let me get the strings out of the way. Kind of a flat spot there. This usually helps with that. So we're going to flip it. All right. Bring it back up. Now this is key. You want to make sure you don't start this out of place and booger up your threads. So there you go. And you'll feel it once you get closer to the shoulder that it'll start to tighten up. And that's where it's cutting a little bit more than it had before. So I'm just kind of saying hello, the die to the shoulder there, but not going crazy with it. All right, that is out of the way. Now, we could give it a little quick test fit, and it looks like it fits pretty good and goes nice up to the shoulder there. All right. Well, that's the fun part. So we're good there. We're going to take this out of here. Thought I could do it by hand. And we're going to flip it around. Now is kind of the fun part because we've got the internal work done. We've got the holes drilled for our refill. We've got the threads ready for that. What we need to do now is shape this. And this is where it gets a little tricky. If you remember, come on over here. I think I talked about this in the section video. This is a section mandrel that holds it by the threads. I mentioned how I don't like these. And the reason being is it's risky for snapping your threads off. But you probably were wondering, well, then why do you have one? And this is why. So I don't have anywhere to hold this inside with threads or anything like I did on the fountain pen section. Because remember, we were going in from the front. So what I need to do is use my section mandrel that holds it by the threads and a live center to support it. And now I can turn this down to size. So you will want one of these, even if you don't use it all the time for fountain pens. But for making a RollerBall, it's a very useful tool. Now, if you get a Beaufort mandrel, some of the Beaufort section mandrels for the Bach have the M10 threads built into the back end. That's just an extra thing that they do. I'll probably get some of these made and put them up on our site as well so that you can just have this little chunk like this with the mandrel or the M10 threads. So let's find a, you know what, I remember. So I don't know when I made this, it's been years, but I didn't make it to fit a collet because I was using a 3-jaw chuck on the metal lathe. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a 4-jaw chuck on the wood lathe with this to hold our mandrel. Let me show you. Lay that down so it doesn't roll. So we can get rid of this guy. We can get rid of this guy. Put that over there. What I do, if you ever wonder, I'm putting a lock on my spindle. That way I can get a little more leverage to knock this off, and then just take that off. So we won't need that. But what I'm going to use is, this is an SC3 chuck, one of my favorite sizes. It's a 4-inch chuck. And I've got these pin jaws on here. And they have the threads on the outside if you're doing like spindle threading of some sort for other turnings. But they actually work nicely for holding a mandrel. And I've done this many times, so... Oh, get the threads out of there, the shavings. So I can put that in there and snug it down, and it's nice and straight. When I turn this on, it's very smooth. So we're going to use that with this extension, and I'm going to lock this down back here. I'm going to bring it up and just touch it. Now I am going to snug that up once this is spinning, but I don't want to start it under pressure because I don't want those threads to be absorbing the impact of the thing starting to spin. So I don't want any extra force coming from this end that'll add to that tension on the threads or the tenon of the threads. So this is our rollerball section. Now shaping is a good thing to talk about here real quick. So you can shape this any way you want, just like your pen. You know, you can have a straight taper from the front to the back. You can add little foregrips in it or dimples or whatever. Just remember, you kind of want it to line up and look good and flow well to the tip however you do it. So we will probably at some point take it off and test fit it on here. But I know that this is about the size of this first step here. So that kind of gives me an eyeball of what to bring it down to size-wise for my test fitting. But I'm going to turn this with Carbide, and it should turn pretty easily. All right, so first thing I want to do is turn on my lathe and then gently snug up my tailstock here. I just want this making good contact. I don't want to overly tighten it down. And the reason being is I don't want to put any undue pressure on those threads or that tenon of the threads. But I first want to round this, so I'm going to speed it up a little bit. And I do have the cam vac running, so if it's a little noisy, I apologize. And you can see these live centers will bury into your material, so you got to snug them up. Just need to get this thing round. Once I get it round, I can make much smoother cuts. That is this here. So it's trying to make contact, but it's spinning. There we go. See if that's better. And obviously I want to be a little more careful with this chuck because I've got more parts here than I did with my Collet Chuck. There we go. So I'm just getting this way down on size. Kind of taper this front a little bit. Well, there's like a million miles of ribbons. One thing I want to do is kind of eyeball where my size is here. Looks like I'm right there. So I may not have to cut that down at all. So I'm going to really have to taper this down to the point of the pen. It's a weird noise, isn't it? All right, let's take a look at this. So we've got kind of a problem here. My point has really dug into my material, and it's really shortened my material up. So I'm gonna have to try to turn it without using that, because this material must be too soft for it, because you can see I've lost a couple millimeters of length there. But while I've got this out, let's see how we are. Yeah, we're a little bit big still, just by maybe a millimeter off each side. But you kind of can see what we're going for now. So that point really did some damage on my end there. Hopefully I've got enough to work with still. So I'm going to turn without the live center, but I'm going to support it with my hand here as much as I can. Yeah, not ideal. Well, I guess I've got the damage done. I can just kind of shorten it up from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shape this first, and then I'll go to my end there. I'm going to take off that millimeter. This would be a good place to measure, so I don't have to keep taking it off. Let's see here. It's around 13. Remember, these are M14s. So yeah, I'm a little big. Ooh, that might have been too much. Let's see. Come on, get out of there. Oh, I definitely am small enough now. Yeah. Might have been smaller than I wanted to go, but that's all right. So we got a lot of material to take off here. And what I'm going to do is bring this down, because I got to take off a lot of that end cap, unfortunately. So I want to get that down as much as I can. I'm going to give this just a little bit of a dip for the grip. Kind of that arc. Whoop. Yeah, it's starting to move on me. Okay. So what we've got going on, this is good because this is real, is that live center is just too much for this material. So what I'm going to try to do is come in from the end here and put my pressure against the chuck, not against the material, and see if I can trim this down to where we can get a flat end. Okay, we're pretty close. That wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be. So what I'm going to do now is do the same thing, only from the end, just try to give me some shape. And looks like I'm going to have to sand that to make my shape how I want. But the good news is, I think we might have saved it as long as we have enough length on our section there. What you're seeing here, that's chatter from not having any support on this end, but that'll sand out really fast. So let's put this together with the refill and make sure it all fits right and that I didn't lose too much on that end, and we'll see if it works. Okay, so I'm going to put this together. What I'm concerned with is that I lost too much material and it might make my tips stick out too much, but we'll see here. or not enough maybe. Well, actually look at that. I got a little extra to work with. So my tip isn't sticking out enough, which is good because now I can bring my taper back and expose my tip a little. So I actually thought that that live center ruined it for me, but boy, I've still got another millimeter or two to work with. Oh joy.
Lucky.
Okay, so what we got to do is take off another tiny bit here. And this is actually kind of cool because you get to see that you can make kind of adjustments on the fly. I should have measured how much I needed to take off, but as you know, I'm not a huge measurer. So I'm trying to just use my finger to support that. That's a challenge there. It's so much easier with the tailstock supporting. I thought I cut back well enough, but I didn't. Yeah, I think I can sand that now. Let's try it. So what I'm going to do is use my sandpaper to give it a little shape at the end here. So I would normally want to turn as much as I could, but because of my error there with the live center, I'm going to kind of use the sandpaper to try to work on this taper. Now I'm starting with 400, which isn't really heavy grit, but typically I start with 600 or 800. But we'll see what we can do here and if this will work. So I want to take off that edge. And you can see the material's coming off in the water here. I'm wet sanding. I always wet sand because I like that the dust is in the water, not in the air. And two, I think it helps make it shinier. So do what you want, but that's why I wet sand. And I'm kind of putting a bind on it here, trying to give it some shape. Like I said, it's much easier with your tools, but you know, before I do this all the way, we should probably test fit it again because I didn't test fit it after we trimmed it. And I don't want to go through all this sanding if it's not the right length, because then I'll get to sand it again. Okay, there she is. Let's see. Test. 1, 2. So it looks like I could expose it a little more, maybe another mil. So I can turn off. I'm going to take with the tool, I'm going to take it off 1 millimeter that way, and then I'm going to use the sandpaper to shape it. I think that's a good solution. All right. Bring this back. I'm glad we tested that before we got too far into the sanding process. And I'm still going to kind of give it some support. Looks pretty good. Wish I could taper that a little bit, but can't put too much pressure on it without risking my tenon back there. So I'm just barely putting any pressure, and I'm using my backhand here to support it. Yeah, that looks pretty good. All right, so get that corner just a little bit. I think we're good. Let's do one more test, and then we will sand it, hopefully, to good looking. Good looking pen status. Okay. And this is actually going to look like a really cool pen, I think. So that's not bad. I could go a little more, but actually I'm pretty happy with that. It's not meant to look like a all metal pen to me, like a, you know, parts pen. So this is kind of a unique, more blunt look. But definitely you could taper that off, but I kind of like the little foregrip there. That'll work. All right, pretty pleased with that. Let's shape it up. So back to the mandrel here. And I'm just snugging that. I'm not really cranking on it because I don't want I don't want to put pressure, that I've said a million times, on that tenon. So I'm going to use this to kind of round this front, give it a little more taper if I can. Rinsing often. And obviously you could get a lower grit paper and really do some shaping here, but I don't really want to do that much. I just want to kind of get this rounded on the front, a little taper. All right. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to stop this, make sure I don't have any tool marks or anything in the resin. I don't see any. I'm just trying to dry it off with my hand. Looks pretty good. All right, now I'm going to do a little 600. Just a little light one. And I like the little dimple there. That's not the right word. This little dip, what would you call that? I like that little grip part, but you can taper it or however you want because it's more of a personal preference with this style of pen than what everybody else likes. All right, let's do Zona. So if you're not familiar with Zona Paper, it's a polish paper made by 3M. Comes in 8.5 by 11 sheets, and I cut it into these little squares. And you just work through the 6 colors. There's 6 colors or 6 grits from an equivalent to about from 800 to about 24,000. So I like it because it's less pieces than others. Like Micromesh has 9, I think. And I think it comes out really good. So I Zona Paper pretty much everything. You can use a little liquid polish at the end to give it a little wet look shine, but you don't have to usually. But everything I do typically is polished with Zona Paper. And I'll use a piece like this for 4 or 5 pens and then switch it out. Or in this case, 4 or 5 parts, not different pens. So I could use a set for a whole pen, the cap body section, other section, whatever, and then I'd switch it. If you're doing kit pens, you could do 4 or 5 bodies. But I'm just going to spend 35, 45 seconds per color, dipping it often. And I do like to keep it moving just a little bit. Try to get that rounded end here. And by the time you get to the 3rd or 4th paper, you'll start to see your piece really starting to shine through the water. You can tell it's shiny even though it's wet. I mean, the wet looks shiny anyway, but you can tell beyond that usually. Yeah, it's starting to come out. This is a color called molten metals that we have at Turner's Warehouse. It's part of our top choice lineup. We make this blank, and it has a really cool melted metal look to it, which you'll see here in just a sec. And all of our top choice blanks we make right here in Arizona. This is the boring part of the video. All right, 2 left. All right, let's take a look. So there you go. Oop. Looks pretty cool. I'm just going to kind of pat it dry. Looks kind of like molten metals. I'm going to go ahead and put a little polish on it. This is, it's called Ring Bling. It's basically a cleaner polisher. You can also use any other plastics polish you have that you like. We use Plastex a lot, which we have here at the store. And you'll see it kind of just starts to work it in there, and then it'll start to get a little shiny. I think sometimes the plastic polishes give you a little bit of more of a wet look than just a polished look, if that makes any sense. So I like the plastics polish as a finisher sometimes. I don't always use it, but that looks pretty good. Hopefully you guys don't see any scratches. I don't see any. Ooh, it's smooth. All right. Let's put it on our pen and see how we did. Now, one thing I would probably do before putting it on the pen normally is I'd put it in the ultrasonic cleaner and get all the dust and debris out of here. But for the sake of the video, we won't do that. But let's put it on. Ah, look at that. You can see there's cleaner coming out of the end. Oh, I guess the moment of truth. So I was kind of eyeballed to see if I did a good job as far as measurement. Looks good. Oh, boom. So that's a rollerball section. That's how I do it. You should do it however you want. But that just gives you an idea. And that was actually kind of good. I could cut out the part where I messed up the end with the live center, but that's actually how it works. I did one yesterday and I didn't have any dimpling from the live center. So materials vary from hardness. But you could also plan for that and just leave your material a tiny bit longer so that you could cut it down to size. So if you weren't sure exactly, you could do all those internal measurements the same, but then leave your last thin cut drill all the way through, but leave your material an extra 5 millimeters. Test it, test fit it, cut it back, cut it back, cut it back. And that way you could really creep up on a good size. And I don't know about you, that looks cool to me, but the shape is totally personal. So I like the way it fits in my hand and feels. So now we can offer this as a rollerball or a fountain, which is pretty dang cool. And there you have it. Thanks for watching this video. If you haven't watched our other custom pen making videos, be sure and check those out. We've got, I think, 4 others now. We go over all the tooling. We do the cap and body threading. We do the making of the section for the fountain pen like this. And then we do all the shaping and polishing. And now you've just watched the rollerball. So you have probably got everything you need to get started and make some custom pens. Be sure and check out Turner's Warehouse. That's my store, and that's where I have all this stuff available.